Well, it's good to have each of you here to be with us this morning. It's good to have Ken and Vicki back. They have been on wheat harvest somewhere in North Dakota or South Dakota or somewhere up there for a few weeks. We're glad to have them back. And I want to tell you how special things are, I believe, in this congregation. I love that we do such a simplistic format on Sunday mornings. And I love the fact that we can study the scriptures openly and each person is able to take with that what they think it means and can go back home and apply it to their lives the way they think it ought to be applied. And so it's a very special place, and I'm grateful to be a part of it. And yes, we're going to turn again to the Gospel of John, and we're going to look at chapter 13. And I've told you on several different occasions that we are apparently in the last hours of the life of Jesus. And yet it's John who records words from Jesus in those last hours that no other writer records. The end of chapter 13, all of chapter 14, chapter 15, chapter 16, chapter 17, are all these last words of Jesus. He's speaking them primarily to the 11, or directly to the 11. Judas has already left. But the application is so great to each of us. And what we look at this morning from John chapter 13 is so very powerful. These are some of the most powerful words that Jesus maybe ever spoke. But I want you to think about the setting in which they are spoken. If you are a teacher, or you have been a teacher, you'll understand the setting. If you are a parent, you will understand the setting. If you have had people working for you, you will probably understand this. Have you ever been giving to your child or to someone in your class or a group in your class really, really important instruction? This is something really, really important. And they don't even get it? You ever had that experience? I've heard Greg tell a story over and over again. Greg Cox is a master storyteller. And I'm going to butcher this a little bit and might even miss it, but I want you to capture this story I've heard him tell many times. It was when he was an assistant coach, apparently with basketball, at halftime. The game has not been going well. So I've not been in many of those halftime locker room talks, but you can imagine that the coach is doing all the coach can do to motivate and to inspire and to instruct and to scold, and it's intense in the moment. And Greg says in the middle of all of that, one young man holds up his hand. And the coach looks at him and acknowledges him. And the young man says, "Coach, are we going to stop and eat someplace tonight after the game?" I mean, we're in an intense moment. We need to win this game. We got to make this all work. And he doesn't even get it. Do you realize that's exactly what's happening with Jesus at this moment? He's going to say something so very, very important. And these 11 men have to win this game. But at least one of them doesn't get it. Because in verse 33, Jesus says to the 11, "I am going away, and where I'm going, you cannot come." Now, that's not all that unusual. They were accustomed to Jesus leaving them and going away for the evening, and maybe all night, and maybe we don't know, but sometimes a little longer than that, and then he would return. They might be rowing across the water, and he might return by walking on the water, but he would go away and he would come back. But maybe maybe everything's a little different. Maybe this night they can sense things are a little different. I'm going away. Where I'm going, you cannot come. And then he says this in verses 34 and 35 that Burke will put on the screen. You know these words, but they are so very important. A new command I give you. Love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. Now, this is a game changer. This is a major statement. You know what happens in the next verse? It's like Peter raises his hand and says, where are you going? Where are you going? I mean, I'm going away, you can't come. And now he speaks these most powerful words, and Peter says, where are you going? And this is important. Look at what he's really saying here. I'm giving you a new command. And the command is that you need to love one another. And the way you're going to understand what that really looks like is the way I have loved you. And by this, people are going to know who you are. This is going to be the one thing that's going to let people know that you really, really belong to me. It's the way it's going to work. And my question is, do the 11 understand? Do they get it? And I personally think it's really, really hard to get the point of what Jesus has just said. I spent a long time of my life thinking that when a preacher got up and talked about love, it was time to go to sleep, that it was going to be pretty weak. I had this idea that if a preacher couldn't think of anything else to say, they could always fall back and pick up a lesson on love. And I felt like that, and I thought like that, and I apparently acted like that for a long time. Until I began to discover that this may be the biggest of all lessons for those who belong to Jesus Christ. This is one big lesson. And I'm still not there. Not only is it difficult to understand, it is even more difficult to apply. And yes, I'll talk, not today, but I'll talk about some of those things. A new command. I'll talk about you must love one another and what that means. And I'll talk about the standard as I have loved you. And I'll talk about it being the chief identifying mark of all who wear the name of Christ. But right now, I'm concerned about this. Did they ever understand, and do we understand this morning what it really means? You're going to find out that it's not a bunch of words. Does that surprise you? You're going to find out you can say, I love you, and not really know what love's all about. You're going to find out that this love is indeed a behavior. And you're going to find out it's something you have to acquire. And you may even find out this morning, if we don't acquire it, things don't look right. So did they ever get it? Years later, that man Peter, who raises his hand, so to speak, and says, where are you going, will write a book called 2 Peter. We've been looking in that book on Wednesday nights. Now, this is years later. It's probably not long before Peter will exit this earth. And in 2 Peter chapter 1, beginning in verse 5, look at what he says. Make every effort to add to your faith. Now, is faith a big word for us? Is that a big word? Well, it's kind of at the heart and center of who we are. It's an everyday thing. I want you to add to your faith goodness. Is goodness a big word for Christians? I need you to add some knowledge in there. And I want you to add some self-control. Is that a big word? Yeah, it's a big word. The self-control, I want you to add some perseverance. Another big word. And godliness. Another daily big word. And brotherly kindness, or this one says mutual affection. And to this brotherly kindness you add, what's the last one? Love. He'll go ahead to say, if these things be in you in increasing measure. In other words, they've got to be growing. And Peter seems to say all these qualities are really, really important for the life of a Christian. But if you want to get to the top of the ladder of what's important, look at the word love. Look at the word love. Now, I'm wondering at this point in the lesson, if you're thinking maybe you ought to go to sleep too. I'm kind of wondering. Because even while I'm speaking this, I kind of feel like just saying this kind of feels like fluff. I mean, the radio has songs every few minutes about love. And people go to the Hallmark store and pick up cards and get an anniversary card or get a card for some, and it's just love and love and love and love. And I think most people have no idea what it means. And most people have been desensitized to the word. So let me take you to what John says. Let me take you to 1 John. Because John is the one who writes this. Matthew didn't write it. And Mark didn't write it. It's John who records the statement of Jesus. And John the apostle is the one who lives the longest. And he's the one who's been around now for a long time. And he's the one who will write the last book of the New Testament. And just almost right before the last book of the New Testament, he'll write 3 little letters. And the first letter is 1 John. And I've gone through this week in this Bible that Burke gave to me, and I have underlined everything he said to disciples, to Christians, about love. Our responsibility. I've gone through and underlined everything. I'm just going to read what I've underlined. Okay? So that means, again, you've got to listen. You got to try to listen intently, or you just got to check out for a little while. But if you check out, you're going to miss something. Dear friends, this is an old man writing to Christians. Dear friends, I am not writing you a new command, but an old one, which you've had since the beginning. This old command is the message you have heard. Yet, I am writing you a new command. Its truth is seen in Him, in Jesus, and in you, because the darkness is passing and the true light is already shining. Anyone who claims to be in this light but hates a brother or a sister is still in darkness. Now, did you hear that? hates a brother or a sister is still in darkness. You think this is going to be pretty strong language? I mean, I don't know what the brother or sister's done. I don't know what they've acted like. I don't know. I just remember, don't I remember that Jesus said something in Matthew's account that we are to love even our what? Enemies? Wow. Anyone who loves their brother and sister lives in light, and there's nothing in them that can make them stumble. But anyone who hates a brother or a sister is in darkness and walks around in the darkness, and they don't know where they're going because the darkness has blinded them. This is the message you've heard from the beginning. We should love one another. Do not be like Cain, who belonged to the evil one and murdered his brother. And why did he murder him? Because his own actions were evil and his brothers were righteous. Don't be surprised, my brothers and sisters, if the world hates you. Don't be surprised if the world out there doesn't understand this love deal. Don't be surprised if the world hates you. We know we have passed from death to life because we love each other. Anyone who does not love remains in death. Anyone who hates his brother or sister is a murderer, and you know that no murderer has eternal life residing in him. This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. So if anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or a sister in need, but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in them? Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth. And this is a command to believe in the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and to love one another as he commanded us. Dear friends, let us love one another. For love comes from God, and everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God. He's writing to members of the body of Christ. But if you haven't found out how to love, you really do not know him. You remember that time when Jesus was saying on that Sermon on the Mount, there's going to be a day when I come and I'm going to say from me to some people, depart from me, for you never knew me, or I never knew you. Depends how it's translated. Kind of makes me think about that. Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Anyone who loves has been born of God and knows God, and whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. This is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him. And this is love, not that we loved God, but that God loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice. And so, dear friends, since God so loved us, we ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us, and his love is made complete in us. God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God, and God in them. We love because he loved us. Whoever claims to love God and yet hates his brother or sister is a liar. For whoever does not love their brother or sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. And he has given to us this command: Anyone who loves God must also love their brother and sister. This little tiny book is 3 pages, 1 John. How much of it do you think I just read? How much of 1 John do you think I just read? Is it half? It's a lot. So I ask you, is the subject of love one to put us asleep? Is the subject of love the one that when the preacher gets up and talks about it, like I used to do, just kind of check out and say, poor guy doesn't have much to talk about this week? Or did you catch the enormous magnitude that John puts on it? I even wonder, and I may get in trouble for this statement, I even wonder if he might not have added easily, you could be baptized into the kingdom of Jesus Christ. But if you hold in your heart a continual hate for someone who is a member of the body, you better watch out. That's how John kind of says it. How can the love of God be in you? How could you really love God if you act like that? Is this too hard? Well, here's the deal. I think we need to learn. Maybe I just say it like this. Maybe I need to learn how to love. And it might surprise you to know that very often in my prayers, one of the things I talk about is the fruit of His Spirit showing up in my life. Remember the fruit of the Spirit? Love, joy, peace, patience. And I have to find myself talking to Him about this one idea over and over again. Will you teach me how to love? Will you keep teaching me more and more how to love? Because you know what? In our world, it's just a whole lot easier not to. In our world, it's just a whole lot easier not to. It's a whole lot easier to be jealous, like Cain was, as John mentioned. It's a whole lot easier to be disgusted with people. It's a whole lot easier to call people, especially in our world today, and Greg prayed about it, the politics of our world today goes like this: if you don't agree with me, you are my enemy. And we talk to people like they're our enemy. And so it's a whole lot easier to take people with whom I disagree and treat them like an enemy instead of love them. And more, this world in which we live is going to do just what John says, or what Jesus actually said. They're going to hate us. They're going to hate everything that belongs to Jesus Christ. We belong to Jesus Christ. And yet, in the midst of a hate-filled world where it's easier to hate than it is to love, we've been called to learn how to love. So would you be willing? Would you be willing over the next 2 or 3 weeks at least to just spend time talking about what that means from the Scriptures? By the way, Paul was not one of those 11. He came just a little bit later. And he's working with the church, writing to a church in Corinth. And the church at Corinth, they're acting like they don't love anybody. They're bickering and they're fighting and they're immoral. And you look at them and say, how can they be a church? And Paul says, you're the church of God. But he said, I'm going to tell you something. You've got to learn how to love. And in chapter 13, he says over and over again, you've got to learn how to love. And he ends by saying, there are about 3 things that are really important that are going to be with you. Faith, and hope, and love. And you want to know which one's the most important, Paul says? It's love. It's more important than all the rest. So are you willing to learn a little bit more about this idea of love. Let's take our communion. Did you catch what John kept saying over and over again? This is how we know what love is. God sent his son Jesus for us. God is love. Jesus is love. And he died that we might be here this morning, living with the greater hope being life eternal. He died for that reason, that we might have our sins gone and we might live with the greater hope.